In the heart of San Francisco, amidst the bustling tech startups and sprawling urban landscape, I worked as an office clerk for a seemingly inconspicuous financial firm. Our building, a stark, glassy structure, was a labyrinth of sleek offices and endless rows of cubicles. My days were consumed by paperwork, client calls, and the relentless clacking of keyboards. It was a world of numbers, deadlines, and coffee-fueled late nights. One particular evening, as autumn winds whispered secrets through the streets, I found myself the last one in the office. A project deadline loomed over me like a specter, and I had resigned myself to another long night. The office was eerily silent. As I typed away, a sudden flicker of movement caught my eye. I glanced up from my screen to see a shadow dart across the floor, slipping into the small space beneath a filing cabinet. Who was there? I shrugged it off and returned to my work. But then, it happened again. This time, the shadow was larger, more defined, and unmistakably human. I froze, my heart racing. The logical part of my brain tried to rationalize it as fatigue, a simple hallucination from too many hours staring at a computer screen. Yet, the primal, instinctive part of me knew better. Something was very wrong. Gathering my courage, I stood up and cautiously approached the filing cabinet. The office was bathed in the cold, blue glow of the moonlight streaming through the windows, casting long, twisted shadows across the floor. I reached the cabinet and hesitated, unsure if I really wanted to know what was hiding beneath it. Suddenly, the entire cabinet lurched forward as if shoved by an unseen force, revealing nothing but the bare carpet underneath. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine. The room felt colder, the air charged with an electric tension. I backed away, my eyes scanning the dimly lit office for any sign of what could have caused the movement. That's when I noticed it. The reflection in the window wasn't my own. Standing behind me was the figure of a man, his features blurred and indistinct, but his stare was unmistakable. It bore into me, filled with an unfathomable sadness and longing. I spun around, but there was no one there. The office was as empty as it had been moments before. Yet, the reflection remained, the figure now reaching out towards me with a hand that seemed to blur and shift, never quite solid. Panic set in, and I did the only thing that made sense. I ran. I sprinted towards the office entrance, not daring to look back. The lights flickered overhead, casting the hallways into brief moments of darkness. I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing my own, always just a few paces behind. I burst through the office doors and into the night, the cool air hitting me like a wave. I didn't stop running until I reached the crowded streets, the presence of other people grounding me back in reality. The next day, I returned to the office, half convinced that the events of the previous night were just the product of stress and overwork. But as I walked past the filing cabinet, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks, a photograph lying on the floor. It was old, faded with age, depicting the office building as it stood decades ago. In the crowd of people in front of the building, one face stood out, matching the blurred figure from the reflection. His expression was solemn, eyes staring out from the photo with the same sadness I had felt. I never found an explanation for what happened that night or who the man in the photo was. Some whispered stories of a worker from the building's early days, lost to time and forgotten by history. But his presence, whatever it was, seemed bound to the place, a lingering remnant of a life once lived. The experience changed me. I no longer stayed late when the office grew quiet and the shadows long. And on those occasions when I felt a chill in the air or saw a flicker of movement from the corner of my eye, I simply acknowledged it with a nod, a silent gesture of respect to the past that dwells within the walls of our modern world. It was the summer of 2019, a sweltering July evening in a sleepy town in Nebraska where nothing much ever happened. That is until that night. My name's Eric, and back then, I was just killing time over the summer before starting my junior year of college. My buddy, Mike, and I had this tradition of hitting up the local diner every Friday night. It was our spot, known for the best cherry pie, and the kind of coffee that could kickstart a dead battery. That night was different, though. As we settled into our usual booth, the air felt heavier, like the kind of humidity that precedes a storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. We ordered our usual, and while we waited, Mike spotted something odd outside the window. A car, an old 70s model, parked across the street. It was odd because it was facing the wrong way, and its headlights were on, illuminating the diner's sign, but nobody ever got out. We shrugged it off, diving into our pie and coffee once they arrived. The diner was unusually empty, save for us, the waitress, and the cook. We could occasionally hear clanging pots in the back. That's when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. The kind of pitch black you only get in the countryside where there's no city light to bleed over the horizon. The waitress, a middle-aged lady named Marlene, muttered something about checking the fuse box and disappeared into the back. Mike and I, left in the dark, used our phones as makeshift torches. We joked about how this was how every horror movie started, not realizing how right we were. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a couple of minutes, the lights snapped back on. Marlene didn't return, though. We called out, no answer. Our laughter for moments before died in our throats. That's when we noticed something even more bizarre. The car outside was gone. Curiosity got the better of us, and despite every nerve in my body screaming that this was a bad idea, we stepped outside. The air was still, the kind of silence that felt like a weight. Across the street, where the car had been parked, was nothing but an empty space. No tire marks, no sign that a car had ever been there. Feeling uneasy, we decided to check on Marlene. The door to the back was ajar, which struck us as odd. Marlene was meticulous about keeping the diner secure, especially at night. We pushed the door open, calling her name, stepping into the dimly lit kitchen. That's when we found her, slumped against the freezer, her eyes wide open in shock, but she was unharmed. She kept mumbling about a man in the dark, how he whispered her name right before the lights went out. We called the police, but they found nothing. No evidence of a break-in, no fingerprints, not even the security cameras caught anything out of the ordinary. It was as if the shadows themselves had come alive for a brief moment, only to retreat back into nothingness. The incident shook us, and the diner never felt the same after that night. Marlene quit a week later, and the diner closed down a few months after, unable to shake off the whispers of what happened. Mike and I tried to rationalize it, to come up with any logical explanation, but we couldn't. That night remained etched in our memories, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places can hide the most extraordinary secrets. A Tuesday evening, just another day at the electronics store where I worked in the bustling heart of Chicago. The store, nestled between a coffee shop with an aroma that often wafted through our doors and a bookshop that seemed perpetually quiet, was usually a haven for tech enthusiasts and the occasionally lost tourist. This evening, however, there was an uncharacteristic chill in the air, a stark contrast to the warmth usually provided by the overhead fluorescence in the hum of conversation. Around 7:45 p.m., a man entered, immediately standing out against the backdrop of casual browsers. His presence seemed to cast a shadow that dimmed the brightness of the store. He was dressed in a nondescript manner, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were of an indescribable color, seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. He meandered through the aisles, hands tucked deep in his pockets, not touching anything, yet every device he passed by flickered briefly, as if acknowledging his presence. Feeling a mix of curiosity and unease, I approached him, offering assistance. His voice, when he spoke, was both soft and gravelly, asking for a device we hadn't stocked in years. I explained this, but he simply nodded, his gaze never quite meeting mine, and continued his aimless wandering. I watched him for a few moments longer before my attention was pulled away by another customer. The evening waned, and the man remained. Customers thinned out, yet he showed no intention of leaving. As the clock neared closing time, I approached him again, this time noticing the subtle, almost imperceptible, smell of ozone that seemed to cling to him. It reminded me of the aftermath of a lightning storm, both clean and slightly unnerving. He finally left, just as I was starting to insist, disappearing into the night without a word. The sense of relief that washed over me was palpable, shared silently by my remaining coworker. We exchanged a look, one that acknowledged the strangeness of the encounter, before beginning the routine tasks of closing up. The next morning, I arrived to open the store and was met with an inexplicable scene. Overnight, every device in the store had powered on, their screens displaying a sequence of colors that didn't correspond to any application or program we offered. More perplexing was the fact that all the footage from the security cameras between 7:45 p.m. and closing time had been corrupted, showing only static. As I stood there, trying to make sense of the chaos, a cold breeze swept through the store, even though every door and window was securely shut. The scent of ozone was stronger now, almost overwhelming. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man from the night before was somehow responsible, a harbinger of something beyond my understanding. The day passed in a blur of technicians and confused customers, the incident hanging over us like a dark cloud.